Enter the golden age of piracy, where a pirate's fate often ended in the gallows. But what happened when the terror of the seas turned out to be a woman? Discover the extraordinary stories of life, death, and survival of legendary female pirates like Bonny, Mary Read, and Ching Shih. From their chaotic trials and spectacular escapes to their tragic ends and rise as immortal icons, this is the story of women who broke all the rules and rewrote their own destinies. So, before you get too comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always interesting to see who's joining us. Queen of the Sea, Part 1. Hello and welcome back to our little corner, where history is no longer dry words on paper, but vivid stories whispered in the night. Tonight, we will set sail together into a rough and often forgotten sea in the annals of piracy. The fate of women who dared to challenge an era. They were women who abandoned silk dresses for breeches, abandoned embroidery hoops for sword hilts, and instead of running a small kitchen, they commanded magnificent ships, spreading terror in the Royal Navy. Their lives are an epic ballad, but the moment of their capture is truly the most fascinating and complicated chapter. The fate of female pirates after being captured is very different from that of men. While male pirates were often tried and hanged quickly, the capture of a female pirate caused confusion and panic in the 17th and 18th century legal system, which had no specific rules for such a case. Imagine the scene. When a pirate ship was captured, the scenario was usually simple and brutal. The men, with their scraggly beards and defiant eyes, would be dragged before a hasty trial. The charges were read, the sentence passed, and the executioner's rope was ready. A few cheers from the loyal crowd, perhaps a few faint-hearted spectators who would vomit at the sight. And that was it. Justice, 18th century style, had been served. Quick, clean, and public enough to deter any young man from thinking of giving up his boring farm work to pursue a career in piracy. But what happened when they unmasked the infamous pirate, took off his three-cornered hat, and discovered that underneath was not a bearded man, but a woman? At that moment, the entire judicial system seemed to stop, like a drunken horse suddenly crashing into a church wall. The cold efficiency of the law was gone. The system was perfectly designed to hang men, but a female pirate was completely unsuitable. The judges, with their white-powdered wigs and stern faces, would squint, blink a few times, and then ask an extremely intelligent question like, "But where is her husband?" Because, clearly, in their minds, a woman could not have chosen a life of crime on her own. It must have been the fault of some man, or Satan, or both. They would frantically leaf through old, dusty law books, desperately searching for a chapter titled Women Pirates and Other Inconvenient Irregularities. Of course, they found nothing, and so the debate began. Is she mad? Is she possessed? Or is this just an elaborate prank? Meanwhile, the woman accused would sit there, perhaps with a smirk, fully aware that just the week before, she had single-handedly sent a couple of officers to the bottom of the sea. This confusion was the first line of defense, the advantage of surprise for female pirates, and no one exploited it more spectacularly than two Caribbean legends, Bonny and Mary Read. In 1720, in Jamaica, the atmosphere in the courtroom was thick. Tropical sunlight filtered through the shutters, illuminating sweaty faces. On the dais, standing next to her lover and fellow pirate Calico Jack Rackham, was Bonny. Her flaming red hair was a defiant flame in the solemn atmosphere. Anne was fearless. She was Irish, fierce, and utterly unimpressive to most men, including those who were about to sentence her to death. They expected her to cry, to beg for forgiveness, perhaps to give a moving monologue about God or knitting. But Bonny was not that type of person. As the death sentence was pronounced, she listened politely. Then, in true style, she looked Calico Jack straight in the eyes, who was trembling as he awaited his death, and uttered a line that would become legendary. If you had fought like a man, you would not have been hanged like a dog. Biting, blunt, and utterly nautical. But that was not all. Bonny, the pirate extraordinaire, had another ace up her sleeve. When it was her turn to face the judge, she did something that silenced the entire courtroom. She announced, "Your Honor, I am pregnant." In 18th century English law, There was an unwritten but powerful rule, born of divine mercy, or perhaps simply a reluctance to kill two birds with one stone. You could not execute a pregnant woman. This was called pleading the belly. Not pleading innocence, but pleading with your own womb. And it worked. Despite the discomfort, the court postponed Anne's execution. Was Anne really pregnant? Or was it all a brilliant performance? A cleverly timed lie? Historians. Rumors began to spread that her wealthy father had bribed for her freedom, that she had started a new life in a foreign land, perhaps still wearing men's breeches and swearing until the end of her days. No one knows for sure. But one thing is clear. She retired in the way of a pirate, which is to say, she didn't die on the gallows. And standing beside Anne in that historic trial was Mary Read. If Anne was fire, Mary was steel, stoic, quiet, and tough. Mary had lived most of her life disguised as a man, fought like a man, and was sentenced to hang like a man. Like Anne, Mary also used the final life-saving charm. She too pleaded her belly. The court once again had to postpone the execution, but Mary's story took a tragic turn. Unlike Anne, who vanished into legend, Mary did not get a second act. In the notoriously unhygienic and disease-ridden prison in Jamaica, Mary fell ill. It was likely a combination of disease, pregnancy complications, and the general atmosphere of rot and despair. There is no record of her giving birth, only a quiet death in her cell. No epic escape, no final duel, no sarcastic zinger for the court, just fever and a grim end for one of the toughest women of the pirate world. She escaped the hangman's noose, but not imprisonment and disease. While Anne and Mary were causing a stir in the Caribbean, halfway across the world, a woman named Ching Shih was playing the pirate game on the hardest difficulty level, and she was winning. Ching Shih did not command a small sloop with a few dozen drunkards. No, she commanded an entire armada. At her peak in the early 19th century, she led over 300 ships and an army of 20, 0 to 80, 0 pirates. She wasn't just a pirate queen. She was a floating, tax-evading, and powerful empire. And unlike Bonny and Read, Ching Shih was never captured, because she had the audacity and intelligence not to allow it. When the Qing Navy, Portuguese ships, and even British forces all failed to crush her fleet, Ching Shih made a move no one could have anticipated. She negotiated. She marched herself right into the office of the Governor General of Guangdong, calmly laid out her terms, and somehow convinced the Qing government to grant a pardon to her, to all of her pirates, and even to let her keep all the loot. That's right. She retired with her dignity, her money, and her head still attached to her neck. Imagine Captain Jack Sparrow walking into Parliament saying, "I quit," and then being handed a pension and a business license. That's essentially what happened to Ching Shih. After her retirement, she opened a gambling house and a brothel, living a life of wealth until she passed away at the age of 69. Her story is important because it proves that being a female pirate didn't have to end in execution or a tragic death. Sometimes it ended in strategy, survival, and a smug retirement. The authorities didn't know what to do with her, not because she broke the rules, but because she rewrote them. So, what happened to the less famous female pirates? Those who lacked Anne's audacity, Mary's toughness, or Ching Shih's strategic mind. After the courtroom drama ended, and the execution was postponed or canceled, the authorities faced an even more awkward question. Now what do we do with her? You couldn't just let a female pirate walk free. She'd be back at sea faster than you could say, "Where's my ship?" But you also couldn't throw her into a regular prison without causing a scandal. Most prisons were designed for men, for chicken thieves, not for women who had stormed merchant vessels and stabbed officers. So, they were often held in makeshift confinement, converted rooms in forts, abandoned houses, or worse, chained up somewhere damp under the governor's office. Sometimes they were locked up with other women, which caused a moral panic. What if they spread their pirate ideas? What if the other women catch ambition? The guards didn't know how to treat them. Like a lady? A criminal? Or an unpredictable force of nature with a sailor's vocabulary? Another solution, perhaps the most bizarre of all, was marriage. Yes, really. Instead of execution or indefinite imprisonment, the authorities sometimes decided, what might solve this is a husband. Their logic, if you can call it that, was that marriage would civilize her. A few years of laundry, childbearing, and passive-aggressive dinner conversations, and voila, problem solved. Some female pirates accepted this fate to survive. They went from swinging a cutlass to stirring porridge, quietly avoiding execution. Others were sent to convents or homes for fallen women. There, they were forced to repent, reform, and reflect on their sins, ideally while learning embroidery. The plan was to turn a sea-hardened woman into a proper lady. And then, there was another path, less glamorous but highly effective: snitching. The authorities were always desperate for information. They didn't just want to catch pirates, they wanted to dismantle entire networks. So, when a captured female pirate offered to spill names, locations, and where Captain X kept his treasure, ears perked up. Facing the gallows, loyalty became a negotiable commodity. Some women used this tactic to buy time. Others used it to walk free. A few even turned it into a full-time job, assisting naval intelligence in hunting down their former friends. It was a cold but strategic pivot. Of course, not everyone was so lucky. For every Bonny or Ching Shih, there were others who reached the end of the rope, and when they did, it was never quiet. The public execution of a female pirate was a sensational event, a moral lesson staged by the state. See what happens when women disobey. But the crowd didn't always follow the script. Some female pirates won over the audience with their sharp wit or sheer defiance. They would walk up the scaffold without flinching, hurl insults at the judge, or even wink at the executioner just to make him nervous. Whatever their reaction, it became part of the legend. Their deaths, instead of erasing them, often made them immortal. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the full picture of the fate of female pirates. They were punished. They were erased. They were turned into cautionary tales. And then, centuries later, they were resurrected as symbols of rebellion. Their story is not just about what happened after their capture. It reveals a world that found a woman with a sword more terrifying than an entire armada. They are reminders that women did not just exist in history. They fought in it, they bled in it, and sometimes, they were the ones at the helm. The loudest echo in history is sometimes not the cannon's roar, but the voice of someone who is never supposed to speak.